5.75%. As you heard there, he went into some detail there. This is around the National Award for Minimum Wage. So this covers a whole lot of different industries and also the overall national minimum wage as well. So both going up by 5.75%. We know ballpark, about 200,000 people affected by just the straight nationwide minimum wage, but more about 2.3 million or so, 2.4 million by the award minimum wage. Where does this sit? Let's remember the unions spoke about 7%. They wanted a 7% increase to keep pace with inflation. Business groups wanted 3.8. As is often the case, it's somewhere in the middle, but closer towards that union amount. And this will begin speculation, I'm sure, as to whether there might be a wage rise. Interestingly enough, from the president there, he seemed to want to head off any talk that this decision would contribute to, well, he said specifically this won't contribute to wage spiral in terms of wages trying to chase inflation. He pointed out, and he's at pains to point out, that about 10% of last year's decision contributed to overall increases in wages in Australia. In other words, even though a quarter of the population is affected by this decision, it isn't a big driver, according to the President of the Fair Work Commission, of overall wage increases in the country. I'm sure that will be debated. Trudy McIntosh, my colleagues here in the studio to talk that through. So run us through the figures in terms of what this means for take-home pay, first of all.
We should be able to run you through some of the dollar figures. We heard the raw percentages here, and this affects, as the Fair Work Commission said, a quarter of employees in this country. We can show you the results of how much more money that people will be getting in their pocket each week if they're entitled to the minimum wage. This is what the ACTU requested, 7%. Business requested 4%. The little bar charts aren't working there, but it's come in closer to what the unions had requested. But as you heard the Fair Work Commission president say, that this is not about litigating competing claims, in his view. It's about determining what is the fairest rate for people to get when they're on the minimum wage. We can show you the dollar figures as well. We've crunched the numbers here. Currently, the per hour figure sits at $21.38. And it is now increased to $22.60 an hour with this 5.75% boost for the minimum wage. As for the per week figure, we should be able to show you this now. $812.60 was what it sat at today. As of July 1, that increase will go to $859.33. So the unions will be happy, Tom, that there's been an increase. It's not as much as they'd requested. They wanted an above inflation increase. The ACTU Secretary Sally McManus on that point this morning, indicating she believes that workers do deserve a real wage increase. We heard the Fair Work Commission reflect on that point, that this is not a real wage increase for those on the minimum wage, but he has to weigh up a whole series of factors. He noted weak productivity growth. That's something the Reserve Bank governor stressed earlier this week, that wages growth cannot come alone without a pickup in productivity. That's the clear message from the Reserve Bank governor. Interesting to see that was echoed back to him by the Fair Work Commission president today.
He said that the medium and longer term should always be that wages, if you encompass everyone in some form of minimum wage, whether it be the minimum wage or the award, the various awards, that it should always keep pace with inflation plus the productivity. Now, at the moment, productivity is basically crawling around at about nothing, but these wages right now in real terms go backwards. So he was at pains to point out that this is not what he wants to hand down. This is basically the highest possible increase he can hand down, he believes, without contributing
to the problem
in any great sense to inflation and making the situation worse.
I also thought it was really interesting. We've seen a change in the legislation in terms of what the Fair Work Commission can consider as a part of this decision. And we saw Adam Hatcher there at pains to stress that the people impacted most are women, females, casual workers, part-time workers. They're the ones who get the lowest paid, or they're in the lowest paid professions in this country, and that for the first time they've taken into account that this increase will help those cohorts. It does help, in his words, try and improve gender pay equity in this country, Tom. So interesting that the change in legislation changes the rationale we hear from the first handing down of the annual wage review by Adam Hatcher.
Which basically adds one more. He spoke about, let's factor in living standards, but also what the economy can handle, all the normal factors. Gender equality is one more in the bucket of reasons to increase it, if you like. And look, if you take a straight line between the two, 3.8 and 7, a decision right in the middle would have been 5.4. So it is above that. I don't know whether you could sort of say that's the gender element pushing it up another 0.35. So yeah, had a bit to say about a further review in terms of that pay gap, and also I'm just going to delve into it. I'm on the fly a bit here, but the C14 versus C13, I think that's going to mean a slightly higher increase, but we'll get to the bottom of that because it got into a bit of jargon there.
The weeds, yes.
Classifications and so on.